Their strategy was sophisticated and multifaceted, designed to create the appearance of legitimate professional concerns while systematically undermining Elena's reputation and opportunities. They began by documenting every minor mistake or procedural deviation in Elena's flying, creating a paper trail that could be used to question her competence. They also started spreading rumors about her social life and personal relationships, suggesting that her success was due to factors other than her professional abilities. The campaign gained momentum when Harrison established contact with sympathetic personnel in the squadron's administrative and training departments. These allies provided advance warning of upcoming evaluations and exercises, allowing Harrison's group to position themselves as observers and critics of Elena's performance. They also began to influence the assignment of training partners and mission roles, ensuring that Elena was often paired with pilots who were either part of the conspiracy or had been influenced by their narrative. Perhaps most insidiously, they began to undermine Elena's relationships with the squadron's leadership by raising questions about her attitude and teamwork during informal conversations. These concerns were presented as genuine worries about unit cohesion and mission readiness, making it difficult for commanders to dismiss them without appearing to ignore legitimate professional issues. Elena remained largely unaware of the campaign being waged against her, focusing instead on her duties and continuing to demonstrate exceptional performance in training and operational missions. Her natural tendency toward professionalism and her focus on technical excellence made her somewhat oblivious to the political undercurrents within the squadron, a blindness that would initially work against her as the conspiracy gained strength. The first strike, the opening salvo in the campaign against Elena Rodriguez, came during a routine training exercise in September 2021. The mission involved a complex air-to-air engagement scenario where Elena was tasked with leading a four-ship formation against simulated enemy aircraft. The exercise was designed to test not just individual flying skills but also leadership capabilities and tactical decision-making under pressure. Elena's preparation for the mission was characteristically thorough. She studied the weather conditions, analyzed the threat scenarios, and conducted detailed briefings with her flight members. Her tactical plan was sound and well communicated, drawing on established Air Force doctrine while incorporating innovative approaches that maximized her formation's advantages. The mission itself proceeded smoothly until the final phase, when Elena made a split-second decision to deviate from the planned route to avoid a developing weather pattern that posed a potential safety risk. The deviation was minor and well within the parameters of sound airmanship, but it provided Harrison with the opening he had been waiting for. Within hours of the mission's conclusion, Harrison had filed a formal complaint questioning Elena's adherence to mission parameters and suggesting that her decision to deviate from the planned route demonstrated poor judgment and inadequate preparation. The complaint was carefully crafted to appear as a legitimate safety concern while actually challenging Elena's competence and decision-making abilities. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel David Park, was initially skeptical of Harrison's complaint. Elena's safety record was impeccable, and her performance on the mission had been objectively successful. However, Harrison was skilled at presenting his concerns in terms of unit discipline and standardization, making it difficult for Park to dismiss them outright without appearing to ignore potential safety issues. What made the situation more complex was that Harrison had prepared supporting documentation from other pilots who had been briefed on the problems with Elena's performance. Captain Mitchell provided a statement questioning Elena's assertiveness during the mission briefing, while Major Chen raised concerns about her communication effectiveness during the tactical phase of the exercise. Elena's response to the complaint was professional and well documented. She provided a detailed explanation of her decision-making process, supported by weather data and safety regulations that clearly justified her actions. Her flight members, when interviewed individually, confirmed that her leadership during the mission had been exemplary and that her tactical decisions had been sound. However, the damage was already done. The existence of the complaint, regardless of its merit, created a perception that Elena's performance was questionable. The squadron's leadership was now on notice that there were concerns about her capabilities, and subsequent evaluations would be influenced by this initial challenge to her competence. More importantly, the incident established a pattern that Harrison would exploit repeatedly over the coming months. Each minor decision or routine action would be scrutinized for potential criticisms, creating an environment where Elena's every move was subject to second-guessing and formal challenge. The psychological pressure of this constant scrutiny would have broken many pilots, but Elena's response would prove to be more resilient than her opponents anticipated. The escalation following the success of his first formal complaint, Harrison became bolder in his campaign against Elena Rodriguez. The autumn of 2021 saw an escalation in both the frequency and severity of the challenges to her professional credibility. What had begun as isolated criticisms evolved into a coordinated effort to document and magnify every aspect of Elena's performance that could be construed as problematic. The next major incident occurred during a night training exercise in November 2021. Elena was assigned to fly a low-level navigation mission through mountainous terrain, a challenging task that required exceptional skill and concentration. The mission parameters called for maintaining specific altitudes and airspeeds while navigating through a complex route using both electronic systems and traditional pilotage techniques. Elena's performance during the mission was flawless from a technical standpoint. She maintained precise altitude control, stayed within the designated flight corridors, and completed all navigation checkpoints within the required time parameters. Her post-flight debrief noted no safety violations or procedural errors, and her instructor pilot provided positive feedback on her airmanship and tactical awareness. However, Harrison had positioned himself as an observer for the mission, monitoring radio communications and tracking Elena's progress through the exercise. He identified a brief moment when Elena's altitude varied by approximately 50 feet from the prescribed level, well within acceptable parameters but technically a deviation from the exact specification. More significantly, he noted that Elena had made 2 radio calls using slightly non-standard phraseology, communications that were clear and effective but didn't conform precisely to the prescribed format, the complaint that Harrison filed following. This mission was more detailed and aggressive than his previous effort. He characterized Elena's altitude deviation as evidence of inadequate aircraft control and her radio communications as demonstrating poor adherence to standardized procedures. He argued that these issues, combined with his previous concerns, indicated a pattern of substandard performance that posed risks to mission effectiveness and flight safety. This time, Harrison was able to secure support from additional Squadron members who had been influenced by his narrative about Elena's supposed deficiencies. Captain Mitchell provided a statement questioning Elena's attention to detail, while 2 junior pilots, both of whom had been the subject of Harrison's informal mentoring, offered observations about her inconsistent performance standards. The accumulation of formal complaints created a more serious problem for Elena and the squadron's leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Park found himself in the difficult position of having to investigate legitimate-seeming concerns while managing the operational requirements of his unit. The time and resources required to address Harrison's complaints were beginning to impact the squadron's overall effectiveness, creating additional pressure to resolve the situation quickly. Elena's response to the escalating campaign remained professional, but she was beginning to recognize the systematic nature of the attacks on her reputation. She documented her own performance meticulously, maintaining detailed records of her training missions, safety compliance, and professional interactions. She also began to seek guidance from mentors outside the squadron, recognizing that the situation was becoming too complex to handle entirely within her immediate chain of command. The psychological toll of the constant scrutiny was significant. Elena found herself second-guessing routine decisions and becoming hypervigilant about every aspect of her performance. The natural confidence that had characterized her flying began to erode under the pressure of knowing that every action would be analyzed for potential criticism. This internal pressure would soon manifest in ways that her opponents would attempt to exploit, setting the stage for the most serious challenge yet to her career: the mentor's intervention. The F-16 Fighting Falcon screamed across the Nevada desert at 600 miles per hour, its pilot executing a perfect knife-edge pass just 500 feet above the scrubland. Inside the cockpit, Captain Elena Rodriguez held the aircraft steady with the kind of precision that comes from thousands of hours of training and an innate understanding of aerodynamics that few pilots ever achieve. The radio crackled with the voice of her flight instructor, Colonel Hayes, calling out her performance metrics from the control tower. Outstanding approach, Rodriguez. Textbook execution on that low-level navigation sequence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena's response was characteristically brief. Copy that, sir. Requesting permission to run the air-to-air intercept scenario. What Colonel Hayes couldn't see from his position in the tower was the slight smile that crossed Elena's face as she banked the aircraft into a climbing turn. At 28, she had already accumulated more flight hours than pilots twice her age, but she approached each training session with the same methodical intensity that had carried her through the Air Force Academy and into the elite ranks of fighter pilots. The year was 2023, and Elena Rodriguez was on the verge of achieving something that would have been unimaginable just 2 decades earlier. But first, she would have to survive a campaign of professional sabotage that would test not just her flying skills, but her resolve, her character, and her ability to navigate the complex politics of military aviation. As she guided her aircraft through the final approach to Nellis Air Force Base, Elena had no idea that this would be one of the last peaceful training flights she would experience for months to come. The storm that was about to engulf her career was already gathering, orchestrated by people who viewed her rapid advancement not as a testament to her abilities, but as a threat to their own ambitions. I wonder where you're watching this story unfold from today. Perhaps you're in a bustling city where the sound of military aircraft overhead is rare, or maybe you're near a base where the roar of jets is part of daily life. Wherever you are, you've probably witnessed someone being systematically undermined by those who felt threatened by their success. But rarely does such a campaign backfire quite as spectacularly as what happened to Elena Rodriguez. Elena's foundation. Elena Rodriguez had been drawn to aviation from childhood, growing up in a small town in New Mexico where the wide-open skies seemed to call to her with an almost magnetic pull. Her father, Miguel Rodriguez, was a commercial airline mechanic who had immigrated from Colombia with nothing but determination and a gift for understanding complex machinery. Her mother, Patricia, worked as a high school mathematics teacher, instilling in Elena a love of precise calculations and logical problem-solving that would serve her well in the cockpit. The Rodriguez family lived in a modest ranch-style home on the outskirts of Las Cruces, where Elena spent her childhood summers helping her father restore vintage aircraft at the local airfield. These early experiences taught her not just the mechanics of flight, but the deeper principles of aerodynamics, weather patterns, and the thousands of systems that must work in perfect harmony for an aircraft to perform safely and effectively. Elena's academic performance in high school was exceptional, but it was her participation in the Civil Air Patrol that truly set her apart. By age 16, she was already earning her pilot's license, demonstrating a natural aptitude for flying that impressed even veteran instructors. Her flight instructor, a retired Air Force colonel named Jack Morrison, recognized something special in the quiet, focused teenager who approached every lesson with scientific precision. Elena had an intuitive understanding of flight dynamics that I'd rarely seen, Morrison would later recall. She could feel what the aircraft was telling her through the controls, but she also understood the physics behind every maneuver. It was the combination of instinct and intellect that marks truly exceptional pilots. The decision to attend the Air Force Academy was influenced by her father's deep respect for military service and Elena's own desire to serve her country while pursuing her passion for aviation. The Academy's rigorous academic and military training proved to be exactly what Elena needed to channel her talents effectively. She graduated third in her class, earning a degree in aeronautical engineering while simultaneously excelling in the leadership and military training that would prepare her for officer responsibilities. Her selection for pilot training came as no surprise to those who knew her capabilities, but Elena approached the program with the same methodical preparation that had characterized her academy years. She studied weather patterns, memorized aircraft specifications, and spent countless hours in flight simulators, building the foundation of knowledge and skill that would later prove crucial when her career came under attack. The assignment following her graduation from pilot training, Elena was assigned to the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base in Utah, where she would begin her operational career flying F-16 Fighting Falcons. The assignment represented both an opportunity and a challenge, as the 388th was known for its demanding operational tempo and high standards of performance. Elena's arrival at Hill Air Force Base in the spring of 2020 came at a time when the Air Force was actively working to increase diversity in its pilot ranks, but the cultural changes were happening slowly and not without resistance. The fighter pilot community, traditionally dominated by white males, was gradually opening to women and minorities, but the transition was uneven and sometimes contentious. Elena's first months at Hill were marked by solid performance and steady integration into the squadron's operations. She flew training missions with competence and professionalism, earning the respect of most of her colleagues through her technical skills and unwavering dedication to safety and mission success. Her approach to flying was characterized by meticulous preparation and precise execution, qualities that served her well in the high-stakes environment of modern military aviation. However, not everyone welcomed Elena's presence or her rapid advancement. The squadron included several pilots who viewed the Air Force's diversity initiatives with skepticism or outright hostility, seeing them as political correctness that compromised merit-based selection. Among these was Major Bradley Harrison, a veteran pilot with 12 years of experience who had been passed over for promotion twice and increasingly blamed his stagnant career on what he perceived as favoritism toward women and minorities. Harrison's resentment wasn't immediately apparent to Elena or to most of the squadron's leadership. He was careful to maintain a professional facade during official duties, but his private conversations with like-minded colleagues revealed a growing bitterness about the changing demographics of military aviation. Elena's competence and rising profile within the squadron only intensified his hostility, though he was skilled at concealing his true feelings behind a veneer of military courtesy. The first signs of trouble emerged during Elena's evaluation period in late 2020. Despite her consistently strong performance in training exercises and her flawless safety record, her official evaluations contained subtle criticisms about her communication style and integration with unit culture. The comments were vague enough to be defensible but specific enough to potentially impact her career advancement. Elena initially dismissed these concerns as normal parts of the evaluation process, assuming that any issues could be addressed through improved performance and better communication with her colleagues. She had no way of knowing that Harrison and a small group of allies were beginning to coordinate a systematic campaign to undermine her credibility and derail her advancement within the squadron. The network forms the conspiracy against Elena Rodriguez began to take shape in the summer of 2021, centered around informal gatherings that Harrison organized under the guise of squadron social events. These gatherings, held at a local bar called the Afterburner, gradually became forums for complaints about the direction of the Air Force and the perceived lowering of standards to accommodate diversity initiatives. Harrison was careful to frame his opposition in terms of unit readiness and mission effectiveness rather than explicit discrimination. He would argue that the pressure to promote women and minorities was creating a two-tier system where some pilots received preferential treatment while others faced unfair obstacles. His message resonated with several pilots who had their own grievances about promotion timelines or assignment preferences. The core group that coalesced around Harrison included Major Scott Chen, a weapons systems officer who had been Elena's academy classmate but harbored resentment about her superior academic performance, and Captain James "Boomer" Mitchell, a pilot whose own advancement had been slowed by a pattern of minor disciplinary issues. These three formed the nucleus of what would become an organized effort to discredit Elena's achievements and create obstacles to her career progression. As the campaign against Elena Rodriguez intensified through the winter of 2021, her situation came to the attention of Colonel Sarah Martinez, the wing's director of operations and one of the most respected officers in the Air Force's fighter community. Martinez had followed Elena's career with interest, recognizing in the young pilot the same combination of technical excellence and leadership potential that had characterized her own rise through the ranks. Martinez's awareness of Elena's difficulties came through informal channels, as the constant stream of complaints and investigations had begun to generate discussion throughout the wing's leadership structure. While the individual incidents might have seemed minor in isolation, their cumulative effect was creating a perception that Elena was a problematic pilot whose career was in jeopardy. What concerned Martinez most was not the specific nature of the complaints, which she recognized as largely trivial, but the systematic pattern they represented. Her own experience as one of the Air Force's first female fighter pilots had given her insight into the subtle forms of discrimination and sabotage that could be used to undermine promising careers. She recognized the signs of an orchestrated campaign and understood the long-term implications for both Elena and the Air Force's broader diversity objectives. Martinez's first step was to conduct her own informal investigation into Elena's performance and the circumstances surrounding the complaints. She reviewed Elena's training records, spoke with instructors and peers who had worked with her, and analyzed the timing and nature of the formal challenges to her competence. The pattern that emerged confirmed her suspicions about the coordinated nature of the campaign. Rather than intervening directly, Martinez decided to approach the situation strategically. She began by arranging for Elena to be assigned to several high-profile missions that would provide opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities in front of neutral observers. These assignments were presented as routine operational requirements, but they were carefully designed to showcase Elena's strengths while minimizing the influence of Harrison's network. The first such assignment came in January 2022, when Elena was selected to participate in a joint training exercise with Allied air forces. The mission required her to lead a mixed formation of American and foreign aircraft through a complex tactical scenario, demonstrating both her technical flying skills and her ability to work effectively with international partners. Elena's performance during the exercise was exceptional. She navigated the complex communication requirements of multinational operations, adapted her tactical approach to accommodate different aircraft capabilities, and demonstrated the kind of leadership and professionalism that made a strong impression on the visiting foreign pilots. Her success in this highly visible assignment provided a counter-narrative to the complaints that had been accumulating in her personnel file. Martinez also began to work behind the scenes to ensure that Elena's upcoming performance evaluations would be conducted by officers who had not been influenced by Harrison's campaign. She arranged for Elena to work with instructors and supervisors from outside the squadron, creating opportunities for fresh perspectives on her capabilities and potential. Perhaps most importantly, Martinez began to prepare Elena for the challenges that lay ahead. During a private meeting in her office, she provided Elena with her first clear understanding of the systematic nature of the campaign against her career. The conversation was carefully structured to provide guidance without making specific accusations that could complicate the situation legally or administratively. Elena, Martinez said, choosing her words carefully, I want you to understand that exceptional performance isn't always enough to protect a career. Sometimes the most talented people become targets precisely because of their abilities. The key is to maintain your standards while building a network of allies who can provide support when needed. Elena's response revealed both her maturity and her determination. Ma'am, I appreciate your guidance. I've been focusing on my flying, but I'm beginning to understand that there are other aspects of military service that require attention. I'm ready to learn whatever I need to know to serve effectively. The mentorship relationship that developed between Martinez and Elena would prove crucial in the months ahead, as the campaign against Elena's career was about to reach its most dangerous phase. Harrison and his allies, frustrated by Elena's continued success and growing visibility, were preparing to escalate their efforts in ways that would test not just Elena's resilience, but the Air Force's commitment to protecting its most promising officers from internal sabotage. The turning point: the campaign against Elena Rodriguez reached its crescendo in March 2022, when Harrison and his conspirators orchestrated what they intended to be the final blow to her career. The incident they manufactured would backfire spectacularly, but not before creating the most serious professional crisis Elena had yet faced. The setup began when Harrison arranged for Elena to be assigned as the flight leader for a particularly complex training mission involving simulated combat operations over contested airspace. The mission required coordination between multiple aircraft types, precise timing of tactical maneuvers, and the ability to adapt to changing scenarios in real time. It was the kind of high-stakes exercise that could showcase exceptional leadership or, if things went wrong, provide ammunition for critics. Harrison's preparation for the mission was meticulous and malicious. He arranged for himself to be assigned as the mission commander, giving him authority over the overall conduct of the exercise. He also ensured that several of his allies were positioned as observers and evaluators, creating a hostile environment where Elena's every decision would be scrutinized for potential criticism. The mission itself proceeded according to plan until the final phase, when Harrison introduced an unexpected variable designed to create a no-win scenario for Elena. He ordered a last-minute change to the tactical approach that required Elena to choose between two equally valid but mutually exclusive options. Whatever decision she made could be criticized as wrong, providing the basis for a career-ending evaluation. Elena's response to the tactical dilemma demonstrated exactly why she had been identified as a future leader. Rather than selecting one of the prescribed options, she developed a third alternative that combined elements of both approaches while addressing the specific challenges of the modified scenario. Her solution was innovative, tactically sound, and executed with precision that impressed even neutral observers. However, Harrison was prepared for this possibility. He immediately filed a complaint charging Elena with failure to follow direct orders and unauthorized deviation from mission parameters. The complaint argued that Elena's improvised solution, regardless of its effectiveness, demonstrated insubordination and poor judgment that made her unsuitable for leadership positions. This complaint was more serious than Harrison's previous efforts because it involved direct accusations of insubordination, a charge that could result in formal disciplinary action or even court-martial proceedings. The complaint was also supported by detailed documentation and testimony from several witnesses who had been coached on the problems with Elena's performance. Elena's initial response to the complaint was confident and well documented. She provided a detailed explanation of her tactical decision-making process, supported by doctrine and training materials that clearly justified her actions. She also obtained statements from several neutral observers who confirmed that her solution had been both innovative and effective. However, the political dynamics of the situation were more complex than the technical merits of Elena's performance. Harrison had succeeded in creating a perception that Elena was a problematic pilot whose career was marked by a pattern of questionable decisions. The accumulation of complaints, regardless of their individual merit, was beginning to influence the judgment of senior leaders who had limited time to investigate each incident thoroughly. The situation came to a head when Lieutenant Colonel Park was ordered to convene a formal investigation into Elena's fitness for continued service as a pilot. The investigation, known as a Flying Evaluation Board, had the authority to recommend removal from flying status or other career-ending sanctions. For Elena, it represented the culmination of Harrison's campaign and potentially the end of her military aviation career. As Elena prepared for what could be the fight of her professional life, she found herself facing not just the specific charges against her, but the broader question of whether exceptional performance could overcome systematic discrimination and sabotage. The answer would determine not only her own future, but the message the Air Force would send to other young officers about the institution's commitment to protecting its most promising leaders. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the conspiracy against Elena Rodriguez and ultimately lead to consequences that none of the participants had anticipated. The quiet, professional pilot who had focused solely on her duties was about to demonstrate that she possessed not just exceptional flying skills, but the kind of strategic thinking and moral courage that would mark her as a leader of the highest caliber. The Flying Evaluation Board convened on a gray April morning in 2022, the kind of overcast Utah day that seemed to mirror the gravity of the proceedings. Elena Rodriguez sat in the sterile conference room at Hill Air Force Base, her dress blue uniform immaculate, her posture straight but relaxed. Across from her, a panel of 3 senior officers prepared to hear evidence that could end her flying career before it had truly begun. Colonel Patricia Webb, the board president, was a seasoned fighter pilot with over 20 years of experience and a reputation for fairness that had earned her respect throughout the Air Force. Major General Robert Thompson, the wing commander, served as the senior member, his presence indicating the seriousness with which the Air Force viewed the proceedings. The third member, Lieutenant Colonel James Foster, was a personnel officer whose role was to ensure that proper procedures were followed and that Elena's rights were protected throughout the process. Elena's military counsel, Captain Lisa Chen, had spent the previous weeks preparing a defense that went far beyond merely refuting the specific charges. Chen had uncovered patterns in the complaints that suggested coordination among Elena's accusers, inconsistencies in their statements, and evidence of bias that called into question the entire foundation of the case against her client. The opening statement from the prosecution, delivered by Major Harrison himself, was a masterpiece of military bureaucracy. He presented Elena's case as a pattern of concerning behavior that threatened unit cohesion and mission effectiveness. His voice carried the weight of authority and experience as he outlined each incident, each complaint, each moment of supposed poor judgment that had led to this moment. "The evidence will show," Harrison declared, his gaze fixed on the board members, "that Captain Rodriguez has consistently demonstrated poor judgment, inadequate adherence to established procedures, and a pattern of insubordination that makes her unsuitable for continued service as a fighter pilot." Elena listened to the accusations with the same calm focus she brought to her flying, taking notes and occasionally whispering observations to her counsel. She had prepared for this moment by reviewing every flight record, every training report, every piece of documentation that could speak to her actual performance rather than the distorted narrative her accusers had constructed. When Captain Chen rose to present the defense's opening statement, the tone in the room shifted subtly. Chen's approach was methodical and precise, building a case that challenged not just the specific allegations but the entire framework of the investigation. "The evidence will show," Chen began, echoing Harrison's phrasing with deliberate irony, "that Captain Rodriguez has been the target of a coordinated campaign of harassment and false accusations, motivated not by legitimate concerns about her performance, but by bias against her presence in the fighter pilot community." The evidence unfolds. The first day of testimony focused on the technical aspects of Elena's flying performance. Harrison had carefully selected witnesses who would emphasize the most critical interpretations of her actions, presenting routine decisions as evidence of poor judgment and minor deviations as signs of incompetence. Captain Mitchell took the stand first. His testimony focused on the November night navigation mission that had generated one of the formal complaints. His description of Elena's altitude deviation made it sound like a dangerous breach of safety protocols rather than a minor variance well within acceptable parameters. "She was clearly struggling to maintain proper aircraft control," Mitchell stated, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had rehearsed his testimony extensively. "The deviation from prescribed altitude lasted for approximately 30 seconds, which in a high-performance aircraft represents a significant safety concern." Chen's cross-examination of Mitchell was surgical in its precision. She introduced flight data that showed Elena's altitude control was actually superior to the average for pilots with similar experience levels. More damaging to Mitchell's credibility, she revealed that his own training records showed multiple altitude deviations that were significantly larger than Elena's but had never been the subject of formal complaints. "Captain Mitchell," Chen asked, her voice steady and professional, "according to your training records, you experienced a 200-foot altitude deviation during your qualification flight last year. Was this incident reported as a safety concern?" Mitchell's uncomfortable silence spoke volumes. The pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. The standards being applied to Elena were far more stringent than those applied to her male colleagues. The second witness, Major Chen, no relation to Elena's counsel, provided testimony about Elena's communication procedures during the joint training exercise. His account portrayed Elena's adaptations to multinational communication protocols as evidence of her inability to follow established procedures. However, Elena's counsel had prepared a devastating response. She introduced testimony from the foreign pilots who had participated in the exercise, all of whom praised Elena's communication skills and adaptability. Colonel Hans Müller, the German contingent commander, had submitted a written statement describing Elena as one of the most professional and effective pilots I have worked with in 20 years of international cooperation. The contrast between the accusations and the objective evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Elena's accusers were describing incidents that had either been taken out of context or presented with such bias that they bore little resemblance to the actual events. The conspiracy exposed. The turning point came on the second day of testimony when Elena's counsel introduced evidence that she had been gathering for months. The investigation had revealed a pattern of coordination among Elena's accusers that went far beyond legitimate professional concerns. Captain Chen presented phone records showing frequent communication between Harrison, Mitchell, and several other conspirators in the days leading up to each formal complaint. Email traffic revealed discussions about building a case against Elena and coordinating their narratives to ensure consistency across multiple accusations. Most damaging was a recording that had been obtained through official channels of Harrison discussing Elena's case with Mitchell at a local restaurant. The conversation, captured by security cameras with audio capability, revealed the true motivation behind the campaign against Elena. "She's making all of us look bad," Harrison's voice was clear on the recording. "Command is holding her up as the example of what a modern fighter pilot should be. If she keeps advancing at this rate, she'll be outranking all of us within a few years." Mitchell's response was equally revealing: "We need to document everything. Make it look like she's not ready for the responsibility. A few more incidents, and command will have to take action." The recording continued for several minutes, revealing a conspiracy that was motivated not by legitimate concerns about Elena's performance, but by resentment over her success and fear that her advancement would overshadow their own careers. Colonel Webb's expression remained neutral, but Elena could see the disgust flickering in her eyes as she listened to the evidence. The systematic nature of the campaign was becoming undeniable, and the credibility of Elena's accusers was crumbling under the weight of their own recorded words. Elena's counsel also presented evidence of the broader pattern of harassment that had accompanied the formal complaints. Witness statements from other female pilots described similar treatment, creating a picture of systemic discrimination that went beyond Elena's individual case. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, who worked in the squadron's operations center, provided testimony about overhearing conversations where Harrison and his allies discussed ways to make the women quit and their belief that diversity initiatives were ruining the Air Force. The cumulative effect of this evidence was devastating to the prosecution's case. What had been presented as legitimate professional concerns was revealed as a coordinated campaign of harassment and discrimination that violated both Air Force regulations and basic principles of professional conduct. Elena's testament. When Elena finally took the stand in her own defense, the room fell completely silent. She had waded through days of testimony, listening to distorted versions of her actions and character, preparing for this moment to tell her own story. Her testimony was methodical and comprehensive, walking the board through each incident that had been used against her. She explained her decision-making process, provided context that had been omitted from the complaints, and demonstrated the professional competence that had been questioned by her accusers. More importantly, Elena's testimony revealed the psychological toll that the campaign had taken on her. She described the constant second-guessing that had begun to affect her confidence, the hypervigilance that had made every routine decision feel like a potential career-ending mistake, and the isolation that had resulted from the systematic effort to undermine her relationships with her colleagues. "I joined the Air Force to serve my country and to fly," Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. "I never imagined that my greatest challenge would come not from enemy aircraft or dangerous missions, but from the systematic effort by my own colleagues to destroy my career." Elena's counsel guided her through a detailed examination of her actual performance record, which told a very different story from the one presented by her accusers. Her safety record was flawless, her training scores were consistently in the top 10%, and her leadership evaluations from neutral observers were uniformly positive. Perhaps most compelling was Elena's explanation of the tactical decision that had triggered the insubordination charges. She walked the board through the scenario step by step, explaining how she had analyzed the situation, considered the available options, and developed a solution that achieved the mission objectives while maintaining safety standards. "I was faced with a choice between two options that both had significant tactical disadvantages," Elena explained. "Rather than accepting failure as inevitable, I developed a third option that combined the strengths of both approaches while addressing their weaknesses. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that the Air Force says it wants from its leaders." The board members leaned forward as Elena continued her explanation, clearly impressed by her tactical acumen and professional bearing. The contrast between her measured, competent testimony and the accusations that had brought her to this point was stark and undeniable. The verdict and its aftermath. The Flying Evaluation Board deliberated for less than 2 hours before reaching their verdict. When they returned to the conference room, Colonel Webb's expression was grave but not unsympathetic. "Captain Rodriguez," Webb began, "this board finds that the charges against you are without merit and that your performance as a fighter pilot has been exemplary. The evidence clearly shows that you have been the target of a coordinated campaign of harassment and false accusations that has no place in the United States Air Force." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her, but Webb wasn't finished. "Furthermore, This board recommends that you be immediately considered for advanced leadership positions commensurate with your abilities and performance. The Air Force needs officers like you in positions of greater responsibility. The recommendation was unprecedented for a flying evaluation board, which typically focused on fitness for continued service rather than career advancement. Webb's words carried the weight of the Air Force's commitment to protecting officers who had been wronged by the system. In the days that followed, the consequences for Elena's accusers were swift and severe. Harrison was immediately relieved of his position and faced charges under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for conduct unbecoming an officer. Mitchell and several other conspirators received formal reprimands and were transferred to assignments that effectively ended their advancement potential. More importantly, the Air Force launched a comprehensive investigation into the culture and practices that had allowed the conspiracy to flourish. The investigation revealed systemic problems with how complaints were handled, how performance was evaluated, and how the chain of command responded to potential discrimination. Elena's vindication was complete, but the experience had changed her in fundamental ways. She had learned that excellence in her profession was not enough to protect her from those who would use the system's own processes against her. She had also learned that she possessed reserves of strength and determination that she had never been forced to tap before. The quiet, technically focused pilot who had entered the Flying Evaluation Board had emerged as something more, a leader who understood not just the technical aspects of military aviation, but the complex human dynamics that could make or break careers and units. The recognition within weeks of the board's verdict. Elena received notification that she had been selected for the Air Force's Advanced Leadership Program, a highly competitive course that prepared promising officers for senior command positions. The selection was accompanied by a personal note from General Thompson acknowledging the injustice she had endured and the Air Force's commitment to ensuring that such incidents never happened again. Elena's acceptance into the program was covered extensively in military publications, but she was careful to keep her public comments focused on her commitment to service rather than the details of her ordeal. She understood that becoming a symbol of the Air Force's diversity efforts carried both opportunities and risks. The leadership program proved to be exactly what Elena needed to channel her experiences into positive change. The curriculum covered not just tactical and strategic military concepts, but also organizational psychology, leadership theory, and the complex dynamics of institutional change. Elena's classmates included some of the Air Force's most promising young officers, and she found herself taking on informal leadership roles that went beyond her rank or experience level. Her ability to remain calm under pressure, combined with her new understanding of organizational politics, made her a natural choice for difficult assignments that required both technical competence and interpersonal skills. The program's capstone exercise was a complex simulation that required participants to lead mixed units through challenging scenarios that tested both their military knowledge and their ability to manage human resources effectively. Elena's performance in the exercise was outstanding, demonstrating the kind of multifaceted leadership that the Air Force desperately needed. More importantly, Elena used her platform to advocate for systemic changes in how the Air Force handled complaints and evaluations. She worked with program administrators to develop new protocols that would prevent future cases of coordinated harassment while protecting the legitimate ability of commanders to address actual performance problems. Her recommendations were incorporated into Air Force policy, creating lasting changes that would protect future generations of pilots from the kind of systematic discrimination she had endured. The quiet pilot who had simply wanted to fly had become an agent of institutional change. The unexpected opportunity. As Elena completed the Advanced Leadership Program in early 2023, she received an unexpected visit from Colonel Martinez, who had continued to serve as an informal mentor throughout her ordeal. Martinez brought news that would reshape Elena's career trajectory in ways she had never imagined. "Elena," Martinez said, settling into the chair across from her in the program's conference room, "I've been asked to recommend candidates for a special assignment. The Air Force is creating a new composite squadron that will serve as a testbed for innovative tactics and integrated operations. They need a commander who can think beyond traditional boundaries." Elena was intrigued but cautious. "What kind of timeline are we talking about, ma'am?" Martinez smiled. "If you're selected and accept the assignment, you'd take command in 6 months. You'd be the youngest squadron commander in modern Air Force history." The magnitude of the opportunity was staggering. Squadron command was typically reserved for officers with significantly more experience and higher rank. Elena would be leading not just pilots, but the entire support structure that made modern military aviation possible. I want to be clear about what this means, Martinez continued. You'd be under intense scrutiny from the beginning. Every decision you make will be analyzed by people who are skeptical about your age, your experience, and your ability to lead. The same people who tried to destroy your career will be watching for you to fail. Elena considered the challenge carefully. The experience of the Flying Evaluation Board had taught her that excellence wasn't always enough, but it had also shown her that she possessed the resilience and strategic thinking necessary to overcome systematic opposition. Ma'am, Elena replied, I've learned that people will always find reasons to doubt your capabilities if they're determined to do so. The only answer is to perform at a level that makes their objections irrelevant. Martinez nodded approvingly. That's exactly the attitude that made me think you were ready for this assignment. The selection process will be rigorous, but I believe you have what it takes to succeed. Elena's preparation for the selection process became her primary focus. Over the following months, she studied everything she could find about squadron leadership, organizational management, and the specific challenges of commanding composite units with multiple aircraft types and mission sets. More importantly, she began to build the network of relationships that would be crucial to her success as a commander. She reached out to senior enlisted personnel, maintenance specialists, and support staff who would be essential to effective squadron operations. Her approach was methodical and genuine, focused on understanding the challenges and perspectives of every element of the organization she hoped to lead. The selection process itself was grueling, involving multiple interviews, psychological evaluations, and practical exercises designed to test her leadership capabilities under stress. Elena's performance was consistently outstanding, but she knew that the final decision would depend on factors beyond her control. When the notification finally came, Elena was in her apartment reviewing technical manuals for the different aircraft types her squadron would operate. The phone call from General Thompson was brief but momentous. Congratulations, Elena, Thompson said, his voice carrying both pride and anticipation. You've been selected for squadron command. The Air Force is counting on you to prove that innovation and leadership can overcome any obstacle. Elena's response was characteristically measured. Thank you, sir. I won't let the Air Force down. As she hung up the phone, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The quiet pilot who had faced systematic discrimination had emerged as a leader ready to take on challenges that would have seemed impossible just 2 years earlier. The conspiracy that had been designed to destroy her career had instead forged her into exactly the kind of officer the Air Force needed for its future. The stage was now set for Elena to prove that leadership wasn't just about technical competence or political maneuvering, but about the ability to inspire others to achieve excellence even in the face of adversity. Her real test was just beginning. Lieutenant Colonel Elena Rodriguez stood before the assembled personnel of the 457th Composite Squadron on a crisp October morning in 2023, her silver oak leaves gleaming in the Nevada sunlight. At 29, she had become the youngest squadron commander in modern Air Force history, but the faces looking back at her showed a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed doubt about her ability to lead. The 457th was no ordinary unit. It was the Air Force's newest experimental squadron, designed to test innovative tactics and integrated operations using a diverse mix of aircraft including F-16s, F-35s, KC-135 tankers, and MQ-9 drones. The squadron's mission was to develop the future of air combat, and Elena had been given 18 months to prove that her revolutionary approach to leadership could succeed where traditional methods had failed. Ladies and gentlemen, Elena began, her voice carrying across the hangar without the need for amplification. I know many of you are wondering what a 29-year-old pilot knows about commanding a squadron of this complexity. That's a fair question, and I intend to answer it through actions rather than words. She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembled airmen, maintenance crews, and support personnel. Over the next year and a half, we're going to rewrite the book on how the Air Force conducts integrated operations. We're going to prove that innovation, collaboration, and mutual respect can achieve results that hierarchy and tradition alone Cannot. Chief Master Sergeant David Williams, the squadron's senior enlisted leader, watched Elena's opening address with professional interest. Williams had served for over 20 years and had worked with commanders ranging from brilliant to incompetent. Elena's approach struck him as different, more collaborative than authoritarian, more focused on empowerment than control. After the formal ceremony, Elena spent the rest of her first day conducting individual meetings with key personnel throughout the squadron. Her approach was methodical and genuine, focused on understanding each person's expertise, concerns, and suggestions for improving operations. She took detailed notes, asked thoughtful questions, and made it clear that she valued input from every level of the organization. The early challenges. Elena's first major test came within weeks of taking command, when the squadron was tasked with developing new tactics for defending against advanced enemy air defenses. The mission required seamless coordination between fighter aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, and drone assets, exactly the kind of complex operation that traditional command structures struggled to manage effectively rather than developing the tactics through the usual top-down approach. Elena implemented what she called collaborative innovation. She assembled mixed teams of pilots, weapons officers, intelligence specialists, and maintenance personnel, tasking each group with developing solutions to specific aspects of the overall challenge. The response from higher headquarters was immediate and skeptical. Colonel James Patterson, the wing commander, called Elena to his office within 48 hours of learning about her approach. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, Patterson said, his tone formal and disapproving, "I understand you're experimenting with unconventional command methods. I need to remind you that military effectiveness depends on clear chains of command and established procedures." Elena's response was respectful but firm. "Sir, I understand your concerns. However, the squadron's mission is specifically to develop innovative approaches to complex operational challenges. I believe our methods should reflect that innovation while maintaining military discipline and effectiveness." Patterson leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the expression of a commander who had seen many young officers convinced of their own brilliance. "You have 6 months to show results, Rodriguez. If your experimental approach doesn't produce measurable improvements in operational capability, we'll be having a very different conversation." The pressure was intense, but Elena had learned to thrive under scrutiny. She threw herself into the work with the same methodical intensity that had characterized her flying career, but now applied to the complex challenges of organizational leadership. The breakthrough came during a large-scale exercise in December 2023, when Elena's squadron was tasked with penetrating heavily defended airspace to neutralize a high-value target. Traditional tactics would have required a large force package with extensive supporting assets, but Elena's team had developed an innovative approach that used coordinated drone swarms to create multiple simultaneous threats while manned aircraft struck from unexpected angles. The exercise results were spectacular. Elena's squadron achieved complete mission success with minimal losses, using fewer resources than traditional approaches while demonstrating tactics that could revolutionize future air operations. The success was documented by independent observers and generated immediate attention from Air Force leadership. More importantly, the exercise demonstrated that Elena's collaborative approach had created a squadron culture where innovation flourished. Personnel at every level were contributing ideas, identifying problems, and developing solutions with an enthusiasm that impressed even skeptical observers. Major General Susan Crawford, the numbered Air Force commander, visited the squadron personally to review the exercise results. Her debriefing with Elena was extensive and highly positive. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez," Crawford said, "what you've accomplished here represents exactly the kind of transformation the Air Force needs. Your results speak for themselves, but I'm even more impressed by the culture you've created. Your people are engaged, motivated, and producing exceptional work." Elena's response reflected the confidence she had gained through her experiences. "Thank you, ma'am. I've learned that the best leaders create environments where everyone can contribute their unique strengths. When people feel valued and empowered, they consistently exceed expectations." Crawford nodded approvingly. "I'm recommending your squadron for the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award. More importantly, I'm recommending you for promotion to colonel. The Air Force needs leaders like you in positions of greater responsibility." The vindication, the transformation of Elena's career from the victim of systematic discrimination to the youngest squadron commander in Air Force history was complete, but the broader implications were still unfolding. Her success had become a symbol of what was possible when merit truly determined advancement and when innovative approaches were given the chance to succeed. The Air Force leadership used Elena's story as a case study in their ongoing efforts to address discrimination and harassment within the service. Her recommendations for reforming complaint procedures and evaluation systems were implemented service-wide, creating lasting changes that would protect future generations of airmen from the kind of systematic abuse she had endured. Elena's former tormentor, Major Harrison, had been court-martialed and dismissed from the Air Force. His co-conspirators faced various levels of discipline, from formal reprimands to forced retirement. The message was clear: the Air Force would not tolerate the kind of coordinated harassment that had nearly destroyed Elena's career. More importantly, Elena's success had inspired a new generation of young officers who saw in her example proof that excellence and integrity could overcome any obstacle. Applications to pilot training from women and minorities increased dramatically, and retention rates among diverse officers improved significantly. The legacy: in March 2024, Elena received notification of her promotion to colonel, making her the youngest colonel in the Air Force's modern history. The promotion ceremony was held at the Pentagon, attended by senior leadership from across the Air Force and representatives from other services who had come to study her innovative approaches to leadership and operations. General Charles Morrison, the Air Force Chief of Staff, delivered the keynote address at Elena's promotion ceremony. His words captured the significance of her achievement and its broader implications for the service. Colonel Rodriguez represents the future of Air Force leadership, Morrison declared. Her journey from a young pilot facing systematic discrimination to the youngest squadron commander in our history demonstrates that excellence will always triumph over prejudice when institutions have the courage to protect and promote their best people. Elena's response to the promotion was characteristically focused on the future rather than past achievements. "This promotion isn't just about my individual success," she said. "It's about proving that the Air Force is committed to creating an environment where every airman can contribute their unique talents without fear of discrimination or retaliation." Elena's squadron continued to break new ground in operational innovation, developing tactics and procedures that were being adopted throughout the Air Force. Her leadership style became the subject of study at military academies and professional schools, influencing a new generation of officers who were learning to balance traditional military values with innovative approaches to modern challenges. The reflection: as Elena settled into her new role as colonel, she often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this unprecedented position. The systematic campaign designed to destroy her career had instead forged her into exactly the kind of leader the Air Force needed for its future challenges. The quiet pilot who had simply wanted to fly had become a symbol of institutional change, a living example of what was possible when merit truly determined advancement. Her story resonated far beyond the military, inspiring young women and minorities in corporate America, academia, and other fields where systematic discrimination remained a persistent challenge. Elena's father, Miguel, had lived to see his daughter's historic promotion, and his pride was immeasurable. "I always knew you were special, Mija," he told her during a private moment at the promotion ceremony. "But I never imagined you would change the entire Air Force." Elena's response reflected the wisdom she had gained through her experiences. "I didn't change the Air Force, Papa. I just proved that it was ready to change itself when given the right opportunity." The future: as this story concludes, Elena Rodriguez continues to serve as a colonel in the United States Air Force, her influence extending far beyond her individual assignments. She has become a mentor to countless young officers, a symbol of possibility for those facing discrimination, and a catalyst for institutional change that will benefit generations of airmen. Her squadron's innovations have been adopted throughout the Air Force, revolutionizing how the service approaches complex operational challenges. The collaborative leadership style she pioneered has become a model for military organizations worldwide, proving that innovation and tradition can coexist when leaders have the courage to challenge outdated assumptions. The conspiracy that was designed to destroy Elena's career ultimately failed so completely that it achieved the opposite of its intended purpose. Instead of forcing her out of the Air Force, it forged her into exactly the kind of leader the institution needed. Instead of preserving the status quo, it accelerated the very changes that her tormentors had sought to prevent. Perhaps most importantly, Elena's story serves as a reminder that excellence and integrity will always triumph over prejudice and discrimination when institutions have the courage to protect their best people. Her journey from persecution to promotion demonstrates that the quiet strength of character is often more powerful than the loudest voices of opposition. Elena Rodriguez didn't just survive the attempt to destroy her career, she transformed it into a platform for changing the entire Air Force. At 30, she stands as the youngest colonel in modern Air Force history, a testament to what becomes possible when talent is allowed to flourish without the constraints of bias or discrimination. The woman who once faced systematic harassment for simply wanting to serve her country has become a symbol of hope for everyone who believes that merit should determine advancement and that excellence can overcome any obstacle. Her story continues to inspire new generations of leaders who understand that true strength lies not in preserving the past, but in building a better future. The quiet pilot who just wanted to fly has become the commander who showed the Air Force how to soar to new heights. Her legacy will endure long after her individual service ends, a permanent reminder that the best way to destroy discrimination is to prove, through exceptional performance, that it was never justified in the first place. Today, Colonel Elena Rodriguez continues to serve with the same dedication and excellence that marked her career from the beginning. The difference is that now, instead of being persecuted for her success, she is celebrated as a leader who embodies the very best of what the Air Force can become when it lives up to its highest ideals. Her story reminds us that sometimes the people who try to destroy our careers end up providing us with the very challenges we need to become the leaders we were meant to be. Elena Rodriguez didn't just survive the attempt to destroy her career, she used it as fuel to reach heights that would have been impossible without that adversity. The rest, as they say, is history in the making.